when God is silent. The Bible says there was a man in the land of Oz whose name was Job. That's Job chapter 1 and verse 1. And that this man was perfect and upright, one that feared God and eschewed evil. And there was born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance was also 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels and 500 yoke of oxen and 500 she-asses and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of the men of the East. And verse 4 says, and his sons went and feasted in their houses every day, every one his day, and sent and called their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And it was so that when the days of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them and rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually. Verse 6, and there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job? For there is none like him in the earth, a man who's perfect and upright, a man that feared God and eschewed evil. And then Satan answered the Lord and said, doth Job fear God for naught? Hast thou not made a hedge about him and about his house, and all that he had on every side? Thou hast blessed the works of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he had, and he will curse you to the face. When God is silent, we celebrate Heritage today from all across the African diaspora. The Caribbean nations are sprinkled across the Caribbean archipelago. Nations jutting out in little islands across the famous Caribbean Sea. From Barbados, the most easterly of the Caribbean islands, all the way through the chain of the Lesser and Greater Antilles, until we get to the tip of Florida, and those hanging in the regions of the Bahamas, where in 1492 Christopher Columbus landed, and apparently, or so it is styled and reported historically, discovered the New World, or a new world. Suddenly, the world was not there until he found it. It had no universal geographical importance until he found it. The people were considered to not have any established lifestyles or livelihood or anything that was worth preserving until they were colonized and enslaved, and until out of their economy rose a plantocracy. The laws of demand and supply in Europe had so dictated the morals of human beings that they would stop at nothing to enrich themselves. They would used the superior power of gunpowder in order to literally uproot, transport, and transplant black-skinned people from their natural habitats into a so-called new world. But the order of that new world was not that appealing after all, for it was one where freedom did not ring. Was a place where the very antithesis of slavery itself is what was the order of the day. From that slave past, we have come to know the world as we know it now. From cane cotton to cotton picking, regardless of the circumstances of industry to which we were suppressed and oppressed, one day the bands were broken. We must now find ourselves, like Alex Haley writes in Roots, we must now trace our ancestry to the place where it all began. But I asked myself, where was God in all this? It is still hard, centuries later, to look at the depicted story of Roots, whether on video or to read it. It's hard to see the plight of the slave without something crying out for justice deep down inside your spirit, saying, this is just wrong. Slave traders taking useless trinkets to the west coast of Africa and entering into a pretentious barter with those who were literally dazzled by these beads, useless beads, giving them the power of guns to mobilize their own kind like cattle and sell them. A whole nation, a continent, would literally be eroded and turned back into the Stone Age by a massive genocide and total annihilation of a race over hundreds of years. And God is silent. They're placed in Trinidad and Barbados and Guyana and Jamaica and Dominica and Grenada. Every place where there is a port and there is a hungry farmer that just simply who believes that his heritage must be accomplished and his dreams of wealth must be accomplished by how many more slaves he could get and how big his plantation can grow. And ship the wealth off to the mother country. And then on top of that, to sort of sanctify these evil deeds, they would simply elevate them to the privilege of being taught Christianity. And God is silent. One cannot look at this massive miscarriage of justice, cannot read the pages of these centuries of ignominy without questioning God somehow, saying, why? How could you? And my concern is, what is God doing all this time? I know that sometimes it is uncomfortable for you to hear these questions asked of God. Something seems rather sacrilegious to even talk about questioning God. You would be more comfortable if perhaps the preacher, instead of saying what was God doing, was saying, I heard from God. You know, now I've discovered something about myself. When folk come to me, brethren, no matter how holy or converted or sanctified you are, I always take a little bit of it gives me a queasy sense when the brethren come to me and say, God spoke to me. I'm religious, all right, but I always wonder to myself now, when somebody starts a conversation like that, God spoke to me, don't you feel a little bit strange? Don't you wonder a little bit now, what side of the deep end are they coming from now? Do we need to get some psycho-evaluation or something? We are more comfortable to talk about God speaking than we are about God not speaking. And I praise God that when He speaks, He does speak. When God speaks, He speaks so strong you can't miss it. And God will speak in all kinds of ways. See God speaking through the thunders of Horeb. Yes, He spoke to Elijah through an earthquake. He spoke to Balaam through a donkey. He spoke to Moses through a bush on fire that did not burn. He spoke to Samuel in a voice in the night. Abraham, He spoke to in a friendly house call. He spoke to Jacob and Daniel in dreams and vision. And He spoke to Israel in a pillar of fire by day and a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. God has no problems speaking. But we have a problem when He does not speak. So God is messing with Job's life. No different from how He was tampering with the life of the African slaves. It didn't take God by surprise. He saw it. And by the way, it would be such a terrible time of total destruction of a culture and an established civilization that we would have to spend the next centuries to literally excavate what used to be before the horrors of slavery. Horrors of slavery for 4 centuries would make the Jewish Holocaust look like a fairy tale. There were universities established. The Sankore University, the oldest university in the world. The oldest university in the world, the Sankore University in Africa at Timbuktu. That has come now, Timbuktu, to be a word that is synonymous with some place that is off the map. Somebody say, I want to send you from here to Timbuktu. They have insulted you. Or so they would like it to appear until you see the light. On the African continent, some of the greatest technology of all time existed. The African pyramids are still some of the wonders of the ancient world, from mathematics and engineering, the kind of science that in the ancient world rose these things to prominence. We have some of the greatest civilized cultures of the day, some of the greatest queens and emperors on the continent of Africa, the great library at Alexandria on the continent of Africa. So it was not any privilege to be taken by force and enslaved in the Caribbean. But sometimes, when we see the movements of God in our personal lives, it can help us understand the movements of God in life in general. Somewhere in the midst of all of this, something that the African slave found in the religion that was supposed to keep them quiet, in the religion that was supposed to tell them about the God who has made a class system in which the white supremacist was at the top and the slave must know his place. And in the midst of all of that, they found out that God was different from the God that the preacher was preaching about, and began to worship God because in the silence of God, they found God speaking. I believe that this is what Job's experience was like. Rich man, wonderful established lifestyle. Like the African slaves, Job was well-to-do. He was in a cultural, civilized situation before the horrors of his tragedy that just was satisfying and met his goals as they were. But while all this was going on, the enemy was planning. He wanted something that Job had. Job had respectability. He had uprightness. He had a certain lifestyle that when he walked by, he observed the laws of God, not the laws of the enemy, the arch deceiver. No, he had good reputation. He had people who admired him, and they would have to say, when they looked at Job, Job has a certain custom. Every day he worshiped his God. Every day he praised his holy name. Every day he gave sacrifice to his God. He was envious of that and wanted to steal it from him. Let me tell you something, my beloved. The old devil is still up to his tricks. He doesn't like when you are doing well in the Lord. He doesn't like when you give your praise to God. He wants some of that praise. He doesn't like when you are dressed up and fixed up and you are prayed up. He doesn't like when you are riding high on the blessings of the Lord. He wants to cut you down, tear you down. He wants to set you back and hold you back. He wants to make sure that you can't make it forward. So he comes on the attack. The white slave traders in the triangular trade experience were about to swoop down on the west coast of Africa and take their slaves across the Middle Passage. So it was that Satan presented himself before God and said, I am here to represent. God said, represent who? Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want Satan representing me. Oh, no. He wanted to represent, but he was not ready. God looked at him and he said, did you consider Job? And I don't know about you, but this is an ordinary man. But when God says, did you consider that ordinary man? That ordinary man is no longer ordinary. He's extraordinary. When God makes you exhibit A in the drama of the ages, it means you have raised yourself to another status, to a place of divine significance. God is about to make you a demonstration. He's about to let the world know that you are his and you are called by his name. So God says, did you consider Job? Satan has an excuse. He said, you build a hedge around Job, but you let him go and he'll curse you to the face. Isn't it interesting that the evil philosophy, the propaganda of social social injustice finds a theology to robe itself in, to make what is evil look halfway decent. That's the kind of message in the educational system that had to be exploded and had to be uprooted, that said that if you are black-skinned, then you are not quite as beautiful. But I want to tell you, that sounds really old now, doesn't it? Because black has been beautiful for so long, we don't even remember the time when they talked about now. But that whole system taught you to hate your thick lips and your wide hips and your broad nose, and it made you try to think that what looked like some kind of Barbie doll that is really truly malnourished kind of representation, that is what beauty is all about. But I want to tell you that the rotten theology, the misguided education of Satan's message to our hearts, it did not faze Job. Neither did it faze. It fazed somewhat. It set back the black experience, but it made us grow something stronger. Yes. Like Job, the poison of this misrepresentation was about to have consequences. Job is now in the hands of Satan, because God will make it appear clear in his demonstration that although God is God, and although he is powerful, it's not all about God. You and I have something to do with what happens in the relationship. What do you say, amen? Yeah, Job was existing by grace, but he had to have some obedience, he had to have some will, he had to have some decision that says, I will be on the Lord's side. So it is that as Job is given into the hands of Satan, he begins to bring calamity after calamity on his head. Now read with me in scripture. You're going to find out what begins to happen. No sooner had Job come out, Satan come out of the presence of the Lord, he began to cause calamity to happen. Read with me from verse 13. There was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house, and there came a messenger, verse 14 of Job chapter 1, and says the oxen were plowing and the asses were feeding, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them away, and have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped to tell thee. And while he was yet speaking, another said unto him, fire of God is fallen from heaven, and hath burned the sheep and the servants, and consumed them, and I only am escaped. And while he is talking, he looks in the distance, and another is running, coming breathlessly, saying unto him, the Chaldeans came up and fell on the camels and slain the servants with the sword, and I only am left escaped to tell thee. And it seemed as though Satan was making this thing, dramatizing it with such a horrible specter that he didn't bring them all at once. He made sure they came one after the other like waves lashing against the beach. And while he was yet speaking, another came and said the great wind of the wilderness smote from the four corners of the house, and it fell on the young men, and they're all dead. Everything is gone. Disaster has come in one day. I think of the slave, who first felt himself entangled like a caught hedgehog in a net that was thrown not for an animal, but to catch a live man. Strong, huge mandingo, grown-up adult, but struggling to get free from this caged net. Then to be found on a slave ship, transported with only room for lying space, packed like sardines. If they were sick, couldn't endure, or even if they made it to shore but sick, there was no health care, there was no insurance, there was nothing. You were just a liability. You were just killed or thrown away. Life had literally no meaning. Only yesterday I was running free, knew my codes, heard my calls, growing to be a man and to know life as I did, but calamity all come in one day. Today, a slave looking back at the shores for Africa, but it's nowhere. Finding yourself on a slave market to be sold like cattle, branded like oxen, beaten like a common bull, and have no dignity, have no pride, have no history, has no family. And God is silent. Job could not understand. He could not understand what was going on. Unless we think that our plight was the only plight. Everybody who stood in the way of this greed that propelled this scandalous economy was at risk. Remember reading in 3rd standard, I think it was, or 2nd standard. You know what that is, do you? You're all Caribbean folk. We didn't talk about grades, we talk about standards. In 2nd standard, reading of the Indian, that poem, how many of you remember reading it? There was an Indian who had known no change, who strayed content along the sunlit beach, gathering shells. He heard a sudden strange commingled noise, looked up and gasped for speech. For in the bay, where nothing was before, moved on the sea like magic huge canoes, and stared and saw, but could not understand. Columbus's doom-burdened caravels slant to the shore, and all his seamen land. The awe-inspiring, dumbfounded outlook of this Indian on the beach who sees the first arrival of Columbus's ships did not realize the world was about to change. That horrible odds were about to come. The encomienda system that would enslave first the Indian before the African came would be just months away. You don't understand what is going on. When God is silent, it brings about frustration. We are frustrated when God is silent. Am I right about that? Yes, you can't understand. It brings frustration. I'm praying, but I don't get any answer. I want this application to send back a positive response, but year after year after year, there is no answer. God is just silent. Job must have been frustrated. But yet the Bible says, in spite of his frustration, he kept on believing in God. To the point where everything was taken away from him, he showed a character that made the Lord proud. He looked at his circumstances. He didn't have any house anymore. He doesn't have any children anymore. But he says, naked came I out of my mother's womb. The Lord give it and the Lord take it away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. I want to tell you that I find in the African experience an indomitable confidence in God that is admirable. Because in the midst of all of the pain and in the midst of the work, we found those slaves singing, oh, I'm going to lay down my burdens down by the riverside. I'm going to study war no more. They didn't preoccupy themselves with hate and hate mongering all the time. No, there was a time when they got together and they praised God. Their backs were bleeding, but their hearts were joyful. It was therapeutic. It had a certain healing power. Yes, when you are at your lowest ebb, praise God, give him glory, lift up his name, match down the old devil, let him know he's a conquered foe. And God is silent, we can worship, can't we? But when God is silent, God is communicating with us. You know, silence is a very powerful form of communication. Sometimes when you talk all the time, they don't hear you no more. Parents, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? You talking and they're just there. The mind is here, but the body is here, but what? The mind is someplace else. Not listening, you are talking, but no communication is happening. Because silence dictates the communication. After a while, any person with a little bit of sense begins to realize they must stop and ask the question, what do you have to say? We use silence in a very profound way. Sometimes we use it to get attention. Have you ever heard about the cold shoulder? Huh? You feel it after a while. You don't have to say nothing. Just don't say nothing. And after a while, everybody wants to know what you're thinking. Why you not talking? So it is that in the midst of the pain of slavery, the slave begins to try to find God, try to see where he is and understand what's about him that we don't understand, and try to find in the silence of God a message that God has for his children. That's what Job did in the midst of the silence. He began to explore for God. He began to try to find God. Satan went back to God, and all the time this is going on in heaven. I want you to understand nothing is going to happen to you other than that God allows. And while it is happening to you, God is not taken by surprise. He's got a plan in place. Goes back. God laughs at Satan in the face. He says to him, you back? You back? Where do you come from? Why are you here? And it's the same question that he had asked him the first time, when he said, from going to and fro in the earth and walking up and down in it. God asked him, same question. Where are you from? Can't be from earth because you have lost to Job. And he said, well, that was just round one, but now I want you to know a man will lose everything, but when his skin is still okay, because you said don't touch him. Give me a chance to touch his skin, and he will curse you to the face. Now, this skin problem was such a fascination to the European Caucasians. The melanin in the skin, do you know, was considered, made black folk considered in the ancient world to a sort of God status. The Egyptians, the first great civilization on the face of the earth, were a people whose legacy in science and mathematics and history and sociology and medicine and psychology and all the sciences influenced the later generation. There is a book written by Dr. W. Val Chambers called Black Men Before Columbus, where he studies the sociology of the Mayan Indians in Latin America and found that the gods that they made, all the gods that they had broad nose and African features. Why? Because the kings and the princes who ruled those dynasties, and those emperors and great leaders were considered gods, like the Roman emperors. They had a god status, and when they died, their images were kept and they were worshipped like gods. So black folk have a legacy and a history that is coming down from a long place. And so the fascination of the pigmentation of the African skin has always been a concern. People wanted to emulate it. Even today, years after slavery, they are still traveling to the Caribbean for a little bit of tan, and they come back and show it off because they want some darkness. Skin for skin, Satan said. Let me touch his skin. He put his skin's bonds on his skin from the crown of his head to the sole of his feet. Well, what will it take to break the spirit of the African slave? Skin for skin. Send the whips across his back. Break him in. Let him know his name is not Kunta Kinte. Break him skin until he says, my name is Toby. But I want to tell you this. You could break my skin, but you can't ruin my heart. You could enslave my back, but it's harder to crush my spirit. Because deep down inside, Job said to himself, come hell or high water, I'm not going to betray my God. Job chapter 2 and verse 9, his wife saw him going to do sacrifice in the midst of his boils and his pain, and she looked at Job and she said, this is the limit. Job, give it up, man, give it up. Why don't you just curse God and die? This man looked at her and he said, woman, you speak like a fool. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. What he had was inside of him was so strong, it was stronger than the boils. So strong, it was stronger than the oppression. So strong, it would liberate him so that inside he was truly free. I tell you, my beloved, they tried slavery, but it didn't crush us. They tried miseducation and propaganda that was Eurocentric, but it didn't take away our dignity. No, no, no. In spite of the odds and in spite of the difficulty, from deep down inside, the old African spirit was still rising against oppression, rising against slavery, rising against subjugation. Yes, yes, it was still rising. Rising even though God was silent. But the silence of God signals our anticipation. So God's silence brings about some human frustration. But while God is silent, God is speaking in the midst of the silence. More than that, the silence of God signals our anticipation. Job had dealt what he thought was the last blow to Satan. But when calamity and disaster didn't work, and health crisis didn't work, Satan had his last great trial for Job, guaranteed to break him. If you follow the story clearly, you realize that that's really what took him to the edge. When the calamity didn't work and the boils and health crisis didn't work, Satan said, I will set the brethren on you. The brethren came. Righteous brethren, if you please. They built some tents around him. And they too were silent for a whole week. Then when they started to talk, it was not even intelligible words, but just sounds to get attention, like something you must have done that made this happen to you. The blame the victim mentality was always a cop-out that others who have no answers would use their downward comparison to realize that if we can oversimplify your calamity, somehow I can explain it in a way that my privilege looks even better. Why did the Africans become slaves? They will go to lengths to tell you how the children of Ham were cursed. And so slavery is a legacy that black people inherit. I want to tell you, my beloved, the Bible never said that Ham was cursed. The Bible said, cursed be Canaan. So if Canaan is the white brother, then he's cursed. But all of it is theology that is erroneous and it goes nowhere. It's just people trying to excuse what makes them ashamed. But if we could catch the glimpse of what Job didn't catch, then God's silence will signal our anticipation. God was looking on all the time while the brothers were trying to tell him what was wrong, and it must be something that you have done. Search your heart. You must have done something wrong. The reason why you are undocumented is not because you are evil. It's not because you just came and violated laws and what have you. My beloved, if we had independence that we have striven for across the Caribbean, and we were not being underdeveloped, the developed world raping our economies, displacing our industries, and placing us as mendicants on the world market, constantly dehumanizing Monetary Fund, all that struggle in the Caribbean periphery can be explained by how Europe underdeveloped Africa and continued to make the colonies that were imperial states constantly beggars for the want of trade. We tried CARICOM. CARICOM didn't work. Read Eric Williams, Capitalism and Slavery, or Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Read Michael Langley's Struggle in the Jamaican Periphery, and you understand how we are constantly seeking American shores, not because we are pursuing any American dream. We are trying to take back our dream that we had in the first place. So when they talk about immigration, they need to understand that a lot is all to the black folk, a lot is all to the slave that still is looking for his 40 acres and a mule. We are still to be compensated. We are still to have reparation. We are still to get our just due. But when you take everything away, I want you to know, even though God is silent now, God is soon to speak up. And when God begins to speak, He's going to break slavery and bring emancipation. When God begins to speak, He will crush Jim Crow laws, and Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights leaders are going to cry, freedom's cry. I have a dream. Yes, yes. God is silent, but He has a move coming. God always have another move. So when it looks like you don't have health care and God is silent, He got another move that is on the way. When it seems like there's not going to be another amnesty, I want you to know He got another move. He might be quiet, but He does not sleep. He's not speaking, but He's about to move. I said, He's about to move. And when He begins to move, the King of Kings, salvation brings, deliverance is on the way. Because when God begins to move, He's going to restore the breach. He's going to repair the broken. What has been taken away will be given back, because God has the last move. That night before Israel left Egypt, when all the plagues were done, there was a silence.
I got it.
The Passover was eaten, and before midnight there was a silence. But in the midst of the silence, God was moving. He was not just